2021 Planning Committee meeting to order. I am Josh Schulman, the chair of the committee from St. Petersburg. For those that are not here, which is everyone, to my left I have Vice Chair Commissioner David Albritton from Clearwater. We have Commissioner Deborah Figg Sanders from the city of St. Petersburg. And to my right we have Commissioner Vince Cox from Pinellas County and Brad Miller, CEO of PSTA. We will start off with public comment. Clarissa, is there any public comment?
There are no public comments in the lobby.
Thank you for that. And we will move on to our first action item, which is the approval of the April 21st, 2021 minutes.
Move to approve minutes from April 21st, 2021.
Second that.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Albritton and a second from Commissioner Cox. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. And so then we move on to the federal grant program of projects. Debbie?
Good morning. Today's action item is to recommend approval of the fiscal year 21 federal program of projects known as our POP and submittal of all grant recommendations or applications. FTA requires all grantees like PSTA to publish a list of projects it proposes to fund with its annual federal apportionments and to provide an opportunity for the public to comment. We just held the public hearing and there were no comments either received or in writing or in person. So what I'd like to do is take a little bit deeper dive into what the program of projects is all about. In your package is the list of those projects. And in there I'm going to highlight some of the key areas. We're talking about replacement of buses. That is our most important thing that we go through every year, is to ensure that we have a fleet of buses that we can replenish those that have reached their life expectancy. And in here we have $3 million set aside from 5307. We also have funding from our 5339. And for the first time, money for the surface transportation program for buses. What we are doing is actually buying buses at 50% hybrid electric and 50% electric. What this does is this is the first time that PSTA is using our formula funds for buses that are electric. And this is actually going to save us some money. We have been very, very successful in receiving LONO funds in the past, but it has also required us to provide a match of PSTA capital reserve dollars. So we're very excited about moving forward with more electric buses. And the other thing that is in here that is of note is that we have some funding in here as it relates to the infrastructure related to having electric buses. So we've set aside $4.5 million for the charging area. This is one of 3 years where we're setting aside funding for this project. In total, it's going to be about an $8.3 million. And to help us take the energy off of the grid that's going to be needed, we're looking for, as you've heard us talk about before, solar panels. So we've got a project in there for $2.5 million. We've done some preliminary design on this, and we're going forth with a full design of what Bonnie would call the full enchilada for everything as it relates going forward that we will then be able to phase in. So the $2.5 million will be for probably our first phase of this, and we will have design completed, estimated by the end of calendar year 2021. So these are some of the exciting things that we have in here, and I would like to entertain any specific questions on these projects.
Okay, do we have any questions from the committee members?
I would like to make a comment.
No questions, but Mr. Miller has something to add.
Yes, thank you, Debbie, for that summary. I would just like to, as she highlighted, it is a pretty historic accomplishment, at least in Pinellas County, to have on the back page the Surface Transportation Priority Funds. These STP funds are the only funds that the Ford Pinellas MPO gets to prioritize and allocate to projects. And maybe Commissioner Schulman remembers, but since the beginning of time, Fort Pinellas is the only urban county, was the only urban county never to flex any of their STP funds to transit, to public transportation. All of the money for the Surface Transportation Program funds in Pinellas County's history until today when it has gone to US 19 interchanges in northern Pinellas County. And so it's pretty exciting to see that $3 million is going to buses. And that's a great thing that Fort Pinellas has done for us, and thanks Commissioner Albritton, who's on Fort Pinellas.
Thank you,
I
Brad.
would echo that. It's one of those items. I remember Cassandra Borchers saying a few years back, we need to get on the list, because the list goes out for a number of years. And it's important once you get on the list, and finally made it. And again,
Yes,
thank
you're-
you for Commissioner Albritton for your support on this at Forward Pinellas. Very exciting news.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Debbie. I will entertain a motion.
Second?
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Fig Sanders and a second from Vice Chair Albritton. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? All right, motion passes. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Forward Pinellas. Thank you, federal and state governments.
I think we were all working together on getting things done, which is good.
Yeah, yeah.
It is nice to see a broadening idea of what transit is
Yeah.
from years past. Our next item is the fare equity proposal. It's an informational item, and Cassandra, I will give the floor to you.
Actually,
I think Brad would like to make a short introduction because I think this is a very important project for us as an agency. And again, we're leading the nation in this discussion. So Brad, I know you had a few statements you wanted to make first.
Thank you, and I think at our last meeting, Chair Cox, he asked about us returning to charging fares on our buses on July 5th. I know none of us can really remember anything that happened before coronavirus. My mind is also blank from that. But right before the pandemic hit, there was this new wave of cities and community thinking about public transportation going on worldwide. And cities were considering if they want to look more broadly at public transportation as part of their overall transportation, which is what Fort Pinellas is doing more and more of, maybe the idea of charging fares maybe should be looked at differently. Maybe, other than toll roads, the roads we drive on we don't have to pay. And maybe public transportation is just part of the mobility network for our community. Especially then during the pandemic, we had the opportunity to kind of focus on the equity principles of all of our things that we do, our organization, our services we provide. Can we look at the fares through the equity lens at maybe the people that most need the service get the best deal, can get the best price. And so this has been exciting. A number of PSA board members asked if we would look into this because we saw Kansas City and Los Angeles and other places looking to maybe have their transit system free. Newsflash, we're not going to get there right away, but maybe make some steps that Cassandra's going to talk about. Cassandra and her team she's going to introduce did a great job in researching those other cities and have a good presentation and a good plan, I think, on how we might move forward with this. Cassandra?
Great, thanks, Brad. Next slide, please, Julie. We talk all the time about how transit is an essential service and how we get people to where they need to go, whether that's school or work or shopping, buying groceries, buying medicines. And we pride ourselves on being able to connect people, to give them access to those new employment opportunities. And we stimulate the economy by doing that, not just the investments that we make in our capital program, but the service that we provide. And Brad has mentioned this before, where we also work at combating climate change and just the act of riding the bus instead of riding in a car by yourself helps with the environment. And then we've taken that one step further of buying hybrid and electric buses as Debbie just talked about. Next slide, please. But we're also part of the infrastructure, and that's the infrastructure of the entire transportation system. And our being in the community helps build the community, and that those access points and the development opportunities around the access points of our bus stops are critical to the way that our community forms and grows. And we provide that extra capacity that is needed in the transportation system without taking up more space. We can't build any more roadways in Pinellas County. And what we're doing right now is just fixing the ones that we have. There will be no added capacity in Pinellas County if it is not on public transportation. Next slide, please. There was no greater example of how essential we were than this year. Where how many calls did we get about our service and the changes that we had to make to our service and the effect that it had on people's jobs, on people's businesses, and in general, their safety. We made sure that we kept our operators safe and our riders safe by suspending fares and asking everyone to board in the rear door. And this is important for the pandemic, but also gave us a glimpse into what would it be like to not have a fare and what was the value of the fare and the service to people who were riding it. At the same time, during this year, we've adopted our new sustainable strategic plan, where we're now more focused on that triple bottom line of supporting our community through social sustainability, through the environmental sustainability that we already provide and doing better at that, but also the economic sustainability of us as an agency and the impact that we have on our community. All of this through the national lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion that a number of transit agencies are looking at across the country. How do we become more equitable? Is it a fareless system? Because the system, all transportation systems, none of them are free. But how do we make it perhaps fareless? And so I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who's a project planner in the planning department, and Heather Sobish, the director of planning, to tell you about the research that we've conducted about other national examples, but also the internal look of Pinellas County and our rider profile here at PSTA. Next slide, please. Nicole?
Yes, thank you, Chair Josh Schulman and the Planning Committee members. So like Brad and Cassandra were saying, we studied both Kansas City and LA Metro as the national leaders of pushing a fareless system. So to give you a little bit more background, last year during the pandemic, on the heels of transit agencies across the country temporarily eliminating their fare, combined with the national push for equity, LA Metro announced a fareless system initiative and task force to explore the feasibility and impact of eliminating fare during an 18-month pilot program. The agency really focused on the help that they could provide to alleviate the burden of the cost of transportation during a time when the economic needs were high and those most at risk of contracting COVID-19, especially those working in essential jobs like healthcare and food service, were LA Metro's most consistent riders, and many of whom met a very low income threshold that LA Metro has established. In this pilot, they're exploring 6 different scenarios, from a fully fareless system to just focusing on K through 12 and low income residents. And the K through 12 and low income resident scenario option is the one that rose to the top outside of looking at just bus or just rail fareless, or looking at peak versus off peak. And the LA Metro board will actually be voting next week on whether or not to approve the pilot for a fareless system for low income and K through 12 students. One of the biggest challenges facing LA Metro is offsetting the loss of their fare box revenue. The agency was already facing a reduction in revenue pre-pandemic, and if they went fully fareless, they would need to consider reducing service. And in order to fund the fareless program without affecting service levels, they will need money and support from local or state governments that has yet to be confirmed. Now, on the other hand, Kansas City began 2020 with a proclamation from the mayor about the need for eliminating transit fare collection as a way to impact the household budgets of families in the city that need it most. And so the pandemic got him started early, but to offset the loss of fare revenue, the mayor had promised $5 million from the city budget to fund most of the first year of a zero fare system, and also formed a partnership with Blue Cross Blue Shield for another $1 million. However, like I had said, the pandemic forced Kansas City to go fare free on their own dime. And since then, the promise for local funding has not yet materialized due to deficits caused by the pandemic, and we actually haven't seen any recent updates as of yet. Next slide, please. So with these two systems, they really started by looking at the gaps of their service, meeting the needs of their communities, and concluded that eliminating fare collection could improve equity in their system. So when we look at our gaps, it's important to begin by looking at our current reduced fare program. And we have 3 tiers of reduced fares. First, we have a limited number of riders that can ride for free. That includes our PSTA employees, children under 5, as well as students and employees through the PSTA U-Pass and C-Pass program. Secondly, our Transportation Disadvantage program is our most robust fare option for low-income residents of Pinellas County, offering a significantly discounted $11 a month bus pass. This partially grant-funded program requires an application process with income verification, and riders eligible for the reduced fare are at 150% of the federal poverty level or below. And speaking of this TD program, according to a Transportation Research Board study, out of the 30 largest transit agencies in the country, only 16 of them offer income-based reduced fare programs. So with that in mind, PSTA is already a step ahead in providing our Transportation Disadvantage bus pass option. Our third tier of reduced fares is the federally mandated half-price fare option for seniors, students, and people with disabilities. So we have been making strides towards equity, and to look deeper at our rider and larger community demographics and profile, I'm going to pass it over to Heather. Thank you.
Good morning. In looking at who we serve, one of the questions we asked is whether the programs we offer sufficiently support our rider base. The majority of our riders have a household income below $25,000. However, the majority also work. We also know that only a small portion of people who are eligible for the $11 bus pass actually apply, and we're evaluating why that might be and if we can make it easier to apply. In addition, eligibility for this program is limited to people whose income is less than 150% of the federal poverty level. So this leaves out many minimum wage workers. Next slide, please. When talking about livability within our communities, we often look at housing and transportation affordability because they are the 2 biggest household expenses. The United Way has developed a survival budget for basic needs that would require a minimum wage of $13.75 per hour for a person living here in Pinellas. And this is obviously higher than the minimum wage and even the minimum wage that'll be increasing soon. So when housing, which is already very expensive, combined with transportation exceed a family's budget, they make trade-offs with things like quality of childcare, healthy foods, and technology. People falling below this hourly wage, this minimum hourly wage up here that is needed for survival budget, work in the service industry, childcare centers, grocery stores, and home healthcare, among other occupations. If we reduce transportation costs in an even more meaningful way than we already do, it might help with other areas of their budget. Next slide, please. So we then looked at whether going completely fareless really solves the host of issues for our riders. A major trade-off of going fare-free, as they saw in LA, is that it would likely result in service cuts, which is exactly the opposite of what our riders regularly tell us they want, better service. As such, it's important for us to balance increased equity with the potential consequences of going fareless, including not only service reductions, but grant eligibility, data loss, loss of our community funding partnerships like the UPass, and other factors. Next slide, please. And then to conclude, I'm going to turn it back to Cassandra.
So how can we become more equitable? We have 3 proposals for you today, and we want to make sure that as we start to take a look at what we would do as an agency, that we want to focus on looking at those low-income fare options and really reduce the barriers for the most marginalized, really helping people with their household budgets first and foremost. Next slide, please. So our first proposal is to launch Flamingo. This is inherently equitable in that the fare capping process of being able to get the best value every single time is going to give those people who ride more often a better fare price. And it won't require them to lay down $70 at the beginning of the month. They can pay as they go and still every time get the best value and the best price possible. Next slide, please. The second one is to take another look at our TD program, the $11 monthly bus pass, and work to increase our community outreach to wraparound services, as well as decrease those barriers to accessibility, like making sure that it's completely online, and which is not right now. And in addition to that, work with Forward Pinellas and the local coordinating board to take another look at the 150% at federal poverty level income requirement, and see if there is something that we ought to be doing in changing that, while still working within the confines of our grant eligibility through the Commission for the Transportation Disadvantaged. Next slide. And then lastly, work with the county and other agencies that are working to reduce the costs of housing to people. So looking at those income-based reduced fare programs that can complement other community initiatives so that we're all working together to move the community forward. Each one of these recommendations in this information item today will come to you as an action item. And we'll begin as soon as next month. And when we launch Flamingo, we'll be taking to the board a new fare policy that illustrates how fare capping will work, the new changes to our MOD fares, and other fare changes that we need to make in order to have a successful launch of Flamingo. So with that, I will turn it over to the chair for questions. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share our research. We are very excited about this opportunity to help our community.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Nicole, and Heather as well. Are there any questions or comments to start? Go ahead and push your button. Commissioner Cox?
Push your button.
You're good.
It's good.
I'm good, thank you. Thank you, Cassandra, Nicole, and Heather. Cassandra, my question comes to the fare capping on the Flamingo. For example, now, like through the MPO, the individual pays, I think one of them is like $35 a month. Am I not correct, for a TD or a reduced fare monthly? Is that how that goes?
So as Nicole mentioned, there are several reduced fare programs that we have. The one that we've been focusing on is the TD program, which is $11 a month. We also have federally mandated half fare programs for seniors, for the disabled, and we extend those to students as well. So we do have a number of demographics that already pay a reduced fare. None of those are income based, but that is the $35 a month fare card that people can be eligible for certain demographics.
Okay, and so the way it would work on Flamingo is they'd be identified as either this category or that category, the $11, the $35? Or,
Right.
Okay, and then.
So as,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
Our TD program, our TD customers currently receive their cards at our customer service centers.
right.
They would get their Flamingo card, it would be registered to them, they would pay their $11, and it would be added to their Flamingo account, just as it was a year ago when they would go and they would get a new card every month for $11. The reduced fare program, once you're identified as a reduced fare a rider, you can load your card just like any other rider, whether you use the customer service center to load it with cash, or you can use it online. But you would receive that reduced fare every time you use the system.
Okay, and so what, in order to streamline, because that gets a little onerous sometimes to go to a customer service center and have to purchase your monthly card, so on. With Flamingo, that there is an ability to do it online as well, and all that data is stored properly, so the $11, it's $11 period for that month, correct?
Yes, so we will have several options. One will be to load your card. One will be online options. We'll also have auto load options for the banked. For people who are unbanked, we will have the customer service centers. But in addition to that, we'll have about 85 different locations around the county where you could reload your card.
Good, like a kiosk or something like that, or like, is it?
There'll be Amscott's, 7-Elevens, and about a
CVS?
dozen local businesses that are going to be able to reload the cards.
That's good. All right, I like that. Thank you. That's all I got.
Commissioner Fig Sanders?
Thank you for the presentation, and I think I'm more so making some observations than I am bringing questions, but one of the first things that I did notice in the presentation and before is that, you know, in a perfect world, we would like to spend no more than 33% for housing. Unfortunately, we know that that is nowhere near the case where we are currently right now. So that just kind of raises, you know, concern for me as we move forward in trying to construct what the implementation costs would be for these various programs, that we not lose sight that graphic is just that. It's a graphic. It's not the reality of where we are with housing costs and what is considered affordable in the city of St. Petersburg. I can only speak for. And when you did your research question, when it came to what the PSTA writers wanted, have we done any type of forecasting in regards to wanting to be more equitable, which I applaud you for, because I agree. I would love to be more equitable moving forward. But what would be that impact of the possibility of providing more of the opportunities that our riders want? Because if we're going to charge less, are we going to be able to provide more frequency? Are we going to be able to provide more evening services? So I really wanted to understand if we've looked at any type of unintended consequences to wanting to be equitable. Where would that cause us to fall short in any other area that our riders are asking for?
I think that you have hit the nail right on the head. We struggle all the time to increase services and be able to make those sustainable changes. We want, when we increase service on a particular route, we want to be able to maintain that. And if we lose fares, as we did this year, right now that's about $10 million a year to our budget. That's some significant service that we could be putting on the road. If we lost that amount of money, we would have to cut service long term. And that is exactly what our riders are asking for. We've talked at the agency and to the board about the power of frequency. And people, that is exactly what people want. They want more service. They want the bus to come more often, run later at night. But it is that frequency that is the king of service. And we are even now unable to provide the level of frequency that people are asking for. And the surveys we have done over the past few years, that is the number one request. Your other question you mentioned about is the fair equity something that people are asking for? And it is not a question that we have specifically asked in the past. However, we just concluded the American Bus Benchmarking Group Customer Satisfaction Survey, and we did ask a question about fares. And so once we get those results back, we can share them with the board. But it was not asked in context of a trade-off of what would you rather have. But from what we've talked to our customers, and Nicole was previously in the public engagement group, so maybe she's got some things to add about her conversations with real people about what they really want. But from what I understand, it's the service more than anything else. Nicole?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. When talking to riders, whether that's on the bus while I'm riding or doing outreach at the terminals, we hear for most people, in order to use the bus, for it to be efficient for them, is frequency, is late night service, is more service on weekends. And in all of my time, I hadn't really heard much of wanting PSTA to be free. I think our riders really understand the value of a public service and knowing that to pay something. And with our TD bus pass at $11 a month, I think that works for a lot of people. I would say, just in my anecdotal experience talking to folks, that the $11 a month is affordable, and to improve for PSTA would be on the service side, so that people don't have to wait an hour for a bus to come, or even 30 minutes. They would like it to come more often than that, and that would really help people's livelihoods, because a lot of people spend a lot of time waiting for PSTA, and that's an area where we could make an improvement for sure.
Thank you. And I would also like to add, I too, having to hear some of the feedback from some of our constituents that actually take the bus, I would, in your presentation to the board, I would, respectfully request that you present that case study as well, that you've had the conversations with our riders and they understand that they would prefer to pay that $11 if they knew that they didn't have to wait an hour, if they knew that they didn't have to take 2.5 hours to get from destination 1 to destination 2, that they knew that they would have additional security measures at some of the larger bus compounds. So I think, we have to weigh what the benefits are for that. I do love the equity lens, but I don't want us to miss what is important to the riders. So I just, the frequency, I would definitely like a little bit more input in regards to that. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? I had a couple of thoughts, and to segue off of Commissioner Fix-Sanders' comments, one of the first things I wrote down when going through the presentation was cost versus value. And we have a lot of folks in our community that focus on cost, either cost to the agency or a personal cost, and there isn't as much focus on the value. And one of your first slides talked about what do transit dollars bring to the community as far as economic development, economic impact. We do transit-oriented development studies to show how things are growing around transit. And so understanding the value, which also includes efficiency, frequency, those sorts of things that riders want, I think is an important part of the conversation, so that we're getting the balance right. I did have a question. What age rider is ridership free? It's age 5?
Five and under, yes.
And at what age, so two-part question, what age do we allow unaccompanied minors to travel? And then secondarily, what age does Pinellas County Schools UPass cover that rider?
We don't have a UPass yet with Pinellas County Schools.
Great.
I've given a proposal to them, but that's not in place yet.
Okay.
We do offer a student pass, but that's not that's just, a student has to come to this center and, show their student ID and then they get it. But hopefully that's in the future. But I think the unaccompanied minor is, we researched this before, I think we have no policy on that.
That is correct.
I think the answer is we don't have a strict a thing on that.
And I feel like I've been asking that same question now for a
have.
while. So I'm a little surprised we don't have at least a policy that states, you know, we're comfortable having, you know, children of a certain age. What I would also say is whatever that age is, that should be the age that that there is no fare. So that those children
Below
are
that,
covered.
yeah.
So if they're coming, you know, if they're coming and forced to come with a parent or guardian or responsible adult, that we're not charging for the children at whatever age that may be on top of it, could certainly help families where they're paying a ever-increasing incremental cost for transit. Also, I wasn't sure if we've looked at, under like a family fare umbrella, having a Flamingo pass that covers 2 adults at a reduced rate. So instead of $35 per, you know, maybe 50 for the month for 2, since a lot of those trips wind up having to be concurrent.
So our Flamingo fare policy does have a group pass, which is a 5-person pass. And so that does not have to be 2 adults and 3 children, or it can be any combination of people that are traveling together. It will be available on the mobile app, and I think that will be most successful on the beach. It'll be a one day pass. And just to answer your other question about students are a half fare already. So under 18 is considered a half fare, but we also do adult student half fares for those schools that do not have UPass, like SPC and PTEC.
And the half fare, is that something that is worked through Flamingo as well? Right,
Yes,
so if I have it on, I have a fare and a half if I'm taking my, you know, 10-year-old on the bus.
right.
Okay. And I know this presentation was going to track as well. Has it already been to the track committee? And if so, what were their thoughts
Yes.
on the trade-off between cost and value?
Good question.
They were very excited about this presentation, and they had a lot to say about the local coordinating board's impact on what we choose to do for the TD program. I don't remember, and maybe Heather can help me out here, that they had a robust discussion about the trade-offs, but they are always complimentary about the work that we do, so I appreciate them for that.
Well, and for good reason that they're complimentary. It is good work. But, you know, to Commissioner Fig Sanders' point, there is and as was mentioned in the presentation, there is a trade-off. And so, you know, as we talk to transit riders, we need to, you know, let them know that it isn't just in a vacuum, hey, can we save you some money? There is a potential loss of service, and you know, really truly get their feedback so that they have buy-in. I appreciate the presentation, the additional answers to questions. Is there anything else? All right, thank you all for a wonderful presentation, and we look forward to hearing more as things continue to unfold.
We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
month.
Thank you.
All right, is there any other business from any members? Commissioner Fig Sanders?
Thank you, Chair. As you were speaking, something did raise a flag to me that I think is, as a parent and grandparent, something that is a little concerning, is that a parent can put a child on a bus at any age, unaccompanied. And so I'm requesting what is the process of initiating that conversation in order for us to establish some sort of policy on that, because I'm looking at the liability that leaves for the driver. You have an unaccompanied minor on your bus. We not knowing medical history, we not knowing anything that's associated with that child. It could have been a child that was abducted from a school that's just left on a bus. We have no control over that. So I will be a lot more comfortable in knowing that we have a policy, something that is enforceable, in place. And so I'm just requesting what, is the formality of having that conversation and moving that forward into determining as a entity, and not to mention the liability that goes along with that.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that that's warranted additional conversation versus I've said this for a long time
Thank
and
you.
it still hadn't gone anywhere. So as a parent, that concerns me, because I know if you're an airline, I mean, you know, there's a certain age, you know, that you have to be in order to fly, and they're not gonna come out of the plane, but you think about all the opportunities for a child to get off a bus unaccompanied, and how does that work? So that's just my question as to the next steps and having that conversation. Thank
So
you.
we'll definitely come and, I'll bring back a proposal next month to have a firm policy. Again, we did look into it, we did look at the risk, the liability issues related to it, I know in the past. And it got down to enforceability, how we could enforce it. I think, you know, we were talking about setting the age at 12, but we'll come back with a proposal.
Okay, thank you for the consideration.
So I appreciate the more forceful bringing that up, because you just accomplished in 5 minutes what I couldn't do in 4 years. So I appreciate that. I will also say one of the mitigating factors for me in this whole thing is that the bus drivers, every PSTA bus is a safe place, and bus drivers are trained to identify, you know, issues with younger children and abuse in the community. So I would hope that training would kick in should they see an unaccompanied minor. So there is additional training to have that built in, but it doesn't circumvent having a policy based on age.
And not to mention the fact of the flow, you know, if you're busy, you know, and depending on the route, bus drivers are human too, you know, and so there's so much going around. I need them to pay attention to the road. I need them to pay attention to the safety of, you know, the overall. And just, again, one of those unintended consequences of that baby being on that bus alone, and you know, the blind side of the driver, and it's nobody's fault, but as a parent, I would feel a little bit more comfortable that we had something that was established and enforceable.
I agree, and I think having a policy, you know, proactively is better than trying to come up with one after something has happened and determine that. Commissioner Cox, you have a comment?
I do. I'm just looking online here, local agencies, PCPT, Pasco County, their policy is 8. A child can travel 8 or above alone, but they don't really recommend it, you know, but that's what their policy is. And there's all sorts of information on here on, to give us ideas.
Yeah.
You know, how to establish a policy on this. And I think this is well taken. This is very well taken, that it's important to do. And I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, that the way you doggedly worked on this. And,
Probably not as doggedly as I could have.
well, stuff happens. And that being said, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Miller, also for your attention to this, and the committee. Thank you.
When I worked in Charlotte, North Carolina, they had a policy of they didn't want the drivers to have to figure out how old everybody was, so they said 46 inches and below, you have to be accompanied by an adult and free. And they had a little piece of tape at 46 around the pole in the bus, so if you were shorter than that, you got to ride for free. You had to go on there. You just had to have somebody taller with you. I don't know what.
Well, it's interesting to have the conversation. I imagine also APTA has, you know, our bus benchmarking group has thoughts and ideas on how they run their policies in different areas.
Yes.
I did want to actually also ask a separate question. Yesterday there was a Sunrunner meeting at 8:30. I forget what that was about. Do you?
I think it was on the transit-oriented development. I don't know if Cassandra is she still here?
I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Cassandra, the meeting yesterday regarding the Sunrunner, I didn't know if there was any initial feedback on how that meeting went. I know there's another public meeting coming up.
Well, I think people who did attend enjoyed the conversation, but we didn't have that many people attend. So we're hoping to get quite a few more people at the event tonight at 5 o'clock. So it'll be between 5 and 6:30. We have had some great press promoting the event. But I do think we had a few people and they found it very interesting to talk about community building around the transportation infrastructure now that it's going to be happening in that corridor.
Well, I thank you for that. I encourage all the people who are watching this meeting live to attend the meeting tonight. Is there any additional items from members? Nope, seeing none, meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting is June 16th.
Thank you.
Not doing anything easy.
So, yeah, June 16th, the room will be reorganized to be more closer.
And then in July, you'll start having staff coming back.
Really?
Oh, well, no, the June Finance and Planning Committees,
I'm talking about.
staff presentations will be where Boo is.
Right, when I'm talking